Welcome. I'm Tom Zimmerman from the EMDR Podcast. I'm here with David Archer, who's an anti-racist psychotherapist from Montreal, Canada. He's a clinical social worker, couple and family therapist, author, speaker, novelist, and a supporter of oppressed and equality-seeking people everywhere. If you're an EMDR therapist, you may know David from his important book. I have it right here, Anti-Racist Psychotherapy. And I've wanted to interview David a while about a book from a few years ago, Racial Trauma Recovery, and his rhythm and processing technique, which we're going to refer to as RAP. Um,
hmm
so every conversation that I've had with David has left me with new insights and important ones. So I'm delighted to be able to share more of your work and mission with people who may already be somewhat familiar with your work, but may be ready to embrace and practice transformational change, but maybe through new lenses or new strategies to
hmm
help us rescue ourselves from
Fantastic.
all of the cultural stuff and all of our individual stuff, and basically rescue ourselves from ourselves. So
hmm
welcome.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And Tom, always a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah,
Many blessings to you and to your audience, and looking forward to this discussion.
excellent. It's also clear to me that you're able to talk about things and talk about transformational change from a place of joy and optimism and hope.
hmm
So, can we start there? Do you know what I mean? Because I
Sure.
think that's what people, in some ways, need to heal, but and it really need to hear. But I think what you have to offer is really compelling stuff related to what now? Or what do we
Mhm.
do about this? We're getting better and better and better at diagnosis, but
Yeah.
of what's wrong with us. But what do we do about any of it?
Right.
So,
Yeah. So I'm going to start because that's a great question. And so I'm going to take this roundabout way of being able to answer it because, as you mentioned, is that I'm a family systems therapist. I work with couples, families, individuals. Even when I meet with an individual, there's usually a context that they find themselves in. So we're never just meeting a person that's really separate from their community or separate from their work environment or separate from their relationship, etc. So when I was writing anti-racist psychotherapy, I did start writing it first from a place of anger, actually, is that I was learning all of the difficult things that were happening during the protests of 2020, police violence, also just knowing that I was experiencing stresses that my white colleagues were not experiencing. And I was trying to understand what was happening, not just from the lens of my emotions, but also from the neurobiological explanations and from the science and the research that was out there. I was trying to make it so that there was a communication between the activist side of myself and also the scientist side of myself. And ultimately, it led to anti racist psychotherapy. It led to the path of just thinking about race from a different perspective and also looking at how we can heal from racial trauma from a different perspective. And then it leads to that third book that you were talking about. Actually, let me not skip. The second book was called Black Meditation 10 Practices for Self Care, Mindfulness, and Self Determination. And I wrote that book because, as you mentioned, I'm in Montreal, Canada. And when I was speaking about being able to treat racial trauma, I noticed that a lot of people were seeking my assistance, but there were only like five other Black therapists that I could refer to because of our own systemic injustices that are in my province. So I wanted to write a book to make it so that it wasn't so much focused on racial trauma, but it was focused on how a person can feel pride and feel good about the situation that they find themselves in, despite the attacks that take place because of anti-blackness and all of this. And so, in Black meditation, it was different practices that people could use to feel good for no reason, to make it so that people could know that they deserve to feel good in their bodies, regardless of their identity, regardless of how society sees them. So I realized that sometimes when we talk about racism or when we talk about treatment resistant issues, it leaves us in this place of it puts us in a box. And so that's why in meeting you and learning about your approaches,
Mhm.
I was also inspired by the way how you were looking at psychotherapy and the practice of it. And by learning about the development of Flash, the development of four blinks, it led me to start to think, okay, how do I put together the idea of anti-racist psychotherapy, the positivity that's in Black meditation? And that's what led to the birth of racial trauma recovery. And so racial trauma recovery was then talking about rhythm and processing strategies of trying to find an integrative framework that could allow people to heal and recover who are most impacted by the violence that is in society. And by being able to make an approach to eliminate, or that's meant to eliminate, the mental health consequences of racial trauma, it ended up being something that helps all marginalized people. So I was also a plenary speaker at the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation in Kentucky. And that's where I spoke about racial trauma recovery and the RAP technique. There was a presentation that showed me using the technique with one of my clients, with their permission, of course. And there were a lot of people who were like, what? People can heal in this way? Like people could heal by watching like a river, or they could heal by watching anime or something. And so I knew that I was onto something, and I wanted to make as many people just know that healing is possible in this way. So then the fourth book is Black Mountain Fight for the Future, which I think you said you have a
Tell us,
copy.
I have that right here. So
You got a copy?
tell us about this, because I've heard you say elsewhere that if
Yes.
you're going to be about something, be about it. You
Yes.
know what I mean? And this is a tell us about tell us about this.
Yes, yes. So again, is that um so writing academically and writing for different audiences, I you know, okay, this is actually reminding me of this. When I went to Kentucky, I remember I spoke to one of the people that was at the hotel, who was one of the attendants. They were asking me, "Oh, so what are you doing down here? You're from Montreal. What are you doing in Kentucky?" I was like, "I'm giving a presentation about anti-racist psychotherapy." They're like, "What?" And I told them that, yeah, it's like there are these books that I've written. There's this thing that's super interesting about how people can heal. And then a young Black lady, and she said, "Oh, well, that's good, but I don't really read that much." And so then it made me think about, this is a younger person saying that she doesn't read, despite the fact that some of our ancestors, when we think about like ancient Egypt, which is called Kemet, some of these people were the first people to invent the writing systems of the papyrus and all of these things, and the hieroglyphs and all this. So the reason why I wrote this book, Black Mountain Fight for the Future, was to have a science fiction novel, something that's very different from what therapists would typically write about. But you can read that book and still understand the previous three books, because I wanted to make it so that different types of audiences can know that trauma is something that impacts people, that trauma is something we can recover from. And by getting in touch with our ancestral memory, and by with through community, and by being able to learn more about ourselves and learn more about how society works, we can access our inner powers to change the future and defeat the interplanetary fascist government that's attacking everybody. So it was a work of joy. It was a work of
Excellent.
joy. I wrote this book because I was like, okay, my son right now, he's about like 18 months old. It's going to be a little bit of time before he goes into university and starts to read about anti-racist psychotherapy. So let me make something that is for younger people, or even just people who want to have a story that's not so academically dense, and something that involves like, the things that are close to my heart: video games, anime, and yeah. And so then the fifth book, Transforming Complex Trauma, the reason why I wrote this is because my brother was like, "I like your books, but your books are so long. I need a shorter book." And I was like, "All right, cool. Let me try to write a book that's even shorter." But then it ended up being a long book anyways, because I can't help it. There's so much that needs to be spoken about. And so Transforming Complex Trauma is going to be the release that's coming out soon. This is the author copy, so your copy will not have this great
Right.
thing on it. But
Excellent.
Transforming Complex Trauma is not only us thinking differently about psychotherapy, about the practice of it, critically looking at the origins, the racist origins that are in the sciences that make it so that anti-racist psychotherapy is not just concerned with therapists, but also dentistry, also with gynecology, and trying to find a way of making it so that regardless of whether you're a practicing psychotherapist, you can still think like a revolutionary therapist in your own way. You
Right.
don't need to have the MSW, the MFT, or the PhD in order to do therapeutic interventions, in order to do things that can help people. And then because many of my clients present not because specifically of racial trauma, but they come to meet with me because they had a racial event with their doctor or with their lawyer or with a police officer. It means we all in our respective fields need to be inspired in this way to create the next um, anti-racist um, dentistry, the next
Mhm.
anti-racist. And I'm saying dentistry and all this because I came back from doing a keynote presentation at the University of Michigan for the MLK Symposium, where I did speak about the joy of helping people to heal and just trying to honor again our ancestors, honoring and remembering MLK's legacy in a proper way, and also seeing that he was a radical and knowing that we need radically different ways of being able to approach these problems. And in the way that we see racism as an untreatable issue, I believe that, and as we're probably going to talk about, many of our clients come to meet with us because they've been told that they're broken. And if we have the technology now to help clients to treat these so-called treatment resistant issues, there may be a way of also being able to treat the sickness that is within the society as well with the right technology and with the right heart behind it.
Yeah. And there's so many things to love about what you're doing, but um, many of the things that you focus on, a lot of people believe are intractable problems.
Mm-hmm.
They're just impossible problems. But it seems to me like the key that you have is you understand how people heal.
Mm,
Right? You have strategies, right? And you see it. That's one of the things that I think a lot of people in our audience, if they're an EMDR therapist, hopefully some people who have not seen transformational healing up front will be able to, see podcasts like this, get curious about it. But can you talk about how this connects? So anti-racist psychotherapy, newer approaches like Flash,
mm-hmm.
right? Because I mean, you're integrating a lot of things, but your approach is very integrated as well, right?
Yes.
And it's not entirely fair to say that the RAP technique is a primarily Flash approach because it has some things from EMDR, it has some things from Flash, it has some things
Yes.
from parts work, it has some things
Yes.
from um, the very kind of integrated approach. But I guess my question is, can you talk about these newer approaches to psychotherapy
Sure.
and what's awesome about them and why they may be unique for anti-racist endeavors?
Sure. So I think some of the problems, um, if I go back to talking about MLK, is that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Is an important part of the American consciousness, but every year he's misremembered, and sometimes he's misremembered um, for specific functions. Is that we can misremember, so we can have some politicians that will say Happy MLK Day, but then if you look, you scroll down their their feed, and you'll see,
Right.
wait, this person had this racist intervention that he had in Congress or something, or they're passing these bills that are anti-immigrant or pro-military. And we need to know that that MLK was not only anti-racist, but he was also anti-poverty, which we rarely talk about poor people when we're talking about therapy or just generally speaking.
Yeah.
We try to marginalize them literally, that we don't even talk about the amount of poor people. And also he was against militarism as well. So these, I think that we need to listen directly to him to be able to really appreciate what he was trying to say. And when we listen to him, even though it's in the 60s that he was talking, the message feels as if he could have just said it yesterday. So with psychotherapy, again, the origins of how it came up, just knowing that Sigmund Freud, he could have made the field start off as being trauma informed a long time ago, but then he was isolated when he would come from talking about, we spoke about the etiology of neurosis, of hysteria.
Yeah.
I believe that that's his
Yes,
reason.
correct.
Okay. And the problem is that he was rejected for talking about the trauma informed perspective, because then it would mean that you'd have to believe his clients, that his clients were saying that they were sexually violated and assaulted by their parents. And that itself was a little taboo. So instead of that, he had to make this psychotherapy that's based on the idea that that it's the therapist who's really going to interpret what the client's experience is rather than the inverse. Coming from a trauma informed perspective means that I'm listening to my client. I'm going to believe them. I believe that because they've been disempowered, I need to find a way of being able to empower them. And even if it does shake this hierarchy between the therapist and the client, there's a possibility that the client is going to end up with a transformative experience. So, um, in the basis of how our field is structured is that there is an expert and there is this person who's just begging to be able to get the healing. Please, like, therapist, help me. And I think that that itself is really related to the white savior complex that's going to say that the white person in the idea is like, let me go to this country and hold pictures of African children because these African children just really want to have my hug, but none of but no money, no resources, no peace. They just want to have an IG photo. And so this this is the reason why I think that I can't look at psychotherapy as being different from our society. I know that there's changes that need to happen in society, in the structure of it, but there's changes that need to happen in the psychotherapy as well. So rather than the psychotherapy being based on this expert insight that's going to come from the therapist to the client, we need approaches that will put the client in a context and environment where they can get the insight that's transformative. And the therapist's role is really just to allow space for it to happen. We need approaches that are going to consider what mindfulness is supposed to be. Mindfulness is not necessarily just a relaxation technique. It's actually meant to see the true reality of what it is that you're experiencing in this moment, as as uncomfortable as it can be. When we are able to sit with the reality of things, we can change the way how we feel about them. And sometimes a byproduct of that will be relaxation. Sometimes a byproduct of that will be insight. And I wanted to find a way of being able to make it so that people could get this benefit from mindfulness without needing to go up in a mountain or in a cave very far away, and that it would be something portable. And so that's why the idea of four blanks, the idea that a person, if they can't go to nature, they can bring the nature to them through watching a picture, video, music, that they can bring these good experiences to themselves. I think there's something transformative in that. And so I'm trying to find out how to not only just talk about anti racism, but make it that the structure of the session is also something that's based on empowering an individual who has been oppressed by a social structure. And that involves changing the structure of how the therapy happens in real time.
Right. And this reminds me of a conference that we have both been to. I want to talk a little bit about one of my experiences at this unnamed conference
Okay.
where in the hallway and in the elevator, I heard an EMDR therapist talking about, and again, white, male EMDR therapist talking about this particular case. And then I did this, and then I did that, and then the client was this way, and then I did. And it seems to me that a lot of psychotherapy, even in a field, 80+% female, it still suffers from the white male ego
Hmm.
footprint. That is
Hmm.
because
Yes.
I was shocked because I'm like, that's not my experience. My experience is that in a great EMDR session, I'm going on a journey with someone and it's their journey. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not like walking around the internal experience,
Hmm.
micromanaging, you know what I mean? Their journey. It's a shocking amount. It's a shocking amount of ego And I think what I love about these approaches and what I love about the wrap technique is that, and I think it's part of, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's part of what this joy that I'm picking up with you is, and I've heard you say it in many different ways. I'm trying to connect you with what's always been awesome
Yes.
in you,
Yes.
is that the core of modern trauma psychotherapies is not the therapist. It is
Hmm.
something that is deep
Hmm.
inside us,
Yes.
right? So if you don't mind, would you mind describing not getting into the details, but describing what transformational change looks like from the perspective of the wrap technique or from
Sure.
other
Sure.
approaches? Because to be honest, EMDR therapists have a glimpse of that, but I would guess that 90% of therapists have
True.
never seen transformational change happen in front of them
Yes.
in a single session.
Yes. So, um, so transformational change, I think, is something that we all want to see happen for our clients, but we don't always know how to make it happen. But I think many therapists have actually seen it, but it was hard for them to be able to piece together what it is that took place. Um, I'll just give an example. Is that typically as a therapist, what happens is that a client comes in and then they're going to say they have this problem. And then we're going to ask some questions of, okay, what exactly is going on? What is this? How do you feel? We'll ask these questions. And sometimes the client can feel a little bit better. And then after they leave, and then we'll wonder, wait a second, what just happened? We're not really sure what happened. And then another client comes in and a similar thing happens. We ask some questions and then they feel a little bit better or maybe feel a little bit worse. And then we wonder what the heck was just going on. But I encountered the problems of when I'd have trauma clients come in, then I'd ask some questions and then they'd feel worse. And so then after I'd have to get my clinical supervision, I'd have to go through my trainings and I'd say, what is that? Why is this happening? And this led me through getting stuck multiple times and clients being able to say, let's try this, or maybe we can try something different. It was in in community with my clients, in community with the colleagues that I have, that allowed me to start to think differently about how therapy can be. So instead of the therapist being the one that's going to ask the questions of of trying to direct how the healing journey should take place, the therapist then can ask a question of, what is the resource that you would like to access? The therapist can give choices for the client in terms of, what's the awesome video you'd like to watch today?
Yeah.
What's the awesome music video? What's the image, you know? And it puts the client who's been deprived of choice because of trauma, because many of our clients have been traumatized without their consent. It puts them in a position where they're able to make a determination as to what is going to be the thing that helps them to heal. And the beautiful thing about it is that when we are able to provide this disconfirmation in how the structure of psychotherapy is, when we're able to provide a disconfirmation in how they remember the thing, and instead of them remembering the trauma and feeling stressed about it, they can instead remember the trauma and puppies, or instead it's now joy, or instead it's now confidence. We are then using what is called memory reconsolidation, that we recall what has taken place, we provide a disconfirmation, and then we re-encode the way how the memory has been stored. And when we are able to do this in a skillful way and in a structured way, we are able to have transformative change take place where the symptoms don't come back, the emotions associated with the symptoms do not feel the same way, and the client doesn't have to be afraid of being able to confront their fears anymore. I think many of our clients are brave to begin with. To be able to say that you're going to sit with a stranger or relative stranger and you're going to share your deepest, most personal fears, that itself requires a degree of bravery. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to make it so that with transformative approaches, is that the therapist too can also facilitate this bravery by making it so that the client can have more choice over what it is that is taking place. That the client is able to exceed our expectations by tapping into their infinite creativity. And ultimately, what I wanted to say before to what you were saying is that we are able to do justice to the term recovery. When I think of recovery, it is that we are reclaiming aspects of ourself that have been powerful from the beginning. When I see my son who's running around and I'm trying to prevent him from trying to chew on electrical cords or trying to jump off of couches, it's like when he hit his head. I held him this morning. I tried my
Yeah.
best, but he got a good hug. And I said, no, this is the reason why gravity works this way and why you can't be that close to the ledge. But he's good. He's all right now. Uh, but the thing is that that curiosity he has, the willingness to want to explore, we've always had these things. But
Right.
when we become traumatized, it limits our idea of what we think is possible. The traumatized client comes with the belief of, I cannot trust people. I am unsafe. I'm not good enough. When we use transformative approaches, we clear out that noise so they can reclaim these positive beliefs that will say, I love myself. I'm a good person. I'm a good son. I'm a good family member, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately, what we want is to make it so we can um, heal from the society that sets a stage where some people are going to be traumatized in different ways or increases the likelihood that certain people will be traumatized in these ways. And we make it so that the people are able to discern, um, is this a belief that's worth keeping? What is the belief that's more important for me? And that choice, the idea of choice, is a key part of being able to bring in disconfirmation and overturning information in my sessions.
Excellent. So, okay, what about this concept? So, okay, I'm someone who's
Hmm.
processed a fair amount of my trauma, and I have new ways of thinking about myself,
Hmm.
but I'm still a person in societies designed to extinguish me. Do you know what I mean? I'm still
Yes.
so I'm asking a rhetorical question to kind of what's the utility in me doing my own work
Mm.
when the work really needs to be social. So can you talk a little bit about
Yes.
resilience or a little bit about
Yes. Sure.
why do my own work when I can't control the levers of power
Yeah.
in the
It's
cultures that surround me?
and okay, there are 2 points here. One of them is that I think it was Einstein who said this, but correct me if I'm wrong. Internet, feel free. That's what the internet is great for. There's always some comment section, anyways. So,
Right.
um, if we have a problem at one level of consciousness, sometimes we need to go to a different level of consciousness in order to resolve it. So, um, if we are thinking about, I want to solve this problem in society, but I am powerless to do so, and that's where we stop, then there's not much more that can be added to that. I want to speak about something that happened last week. There was a client that we were working on a trauma target. Well, before we worked on the trauma that she wanted to work on, I said, we're going to use a racial trauma target instead. And so we used an issue that related to the colonization of her homeland. While we were working on it, there was a part of her that was upset because she said, well, I don't want to get rid of my rage because what they did to me was not just. And we had to have a little discussion about that. Is that I told her that I'm definitely an anti-racist and I definitely agree that the anger that you have is justified. But when it is rage in this form, it seems as if it's directed towards yourself, that we need to make it so that we process this negative belief that's associated with the colonization that says, I'm not good enough. And when we are able to heal from these negative beliefs that are there, we are put into a better situation where we can heal not from this wounded position or from a place of deficit, but from a place of integrity. So then, after she was able to install a belief that said that she is one with her ancestors, if we are going to do activism and the negative belief is I'm not good enough, there's a chance, increased chance of burnout because you're reinforcing this negative belief, increased chance of ineffectiveness of the method and the intervention. If we are going to do activism and the basis of it is I am one with my ancestors, there's a higher chance that you are connecting to something that's greater to yourself. you're also thinking of community, and there's a different type of fuel. Rather than burning your own candle, you're also like moving with the momentum of something that's intangible and spiritual as well. And so when we are able to install positive beliefs that are accessing something that's very different from where we are at, when we are processing trauma targets that are very different from just the standard things that a therapist is going to ask, the client gets answers that exceed our expectations. I'll say it in another way. I had a client who is Lebanese, and they're very fearful of bombs being dropped on their family, even though they're over in Canada. And I could have, as a therapist, given some explanations of their cognitive distortions or tried to say,
Right.
well, no, this is how things are going to go. I could have given all of these explanations. Instead, what we used was resource integration, which is a technique that is in the rhythm and processing strategies. So we had an unsolvable problem. There was almost nothing that I could say to her about the fear that she has of her family being in danger. But when we use the resources, she was able to connect to something that's much, much deeper than my knowledge. It connected to an ancestral or a cultural memory. So she was able to connect to an image of her playing cards lit, and the environment is lit by candlelight. And even though at that time during the Civil War, there were bombs that were dropping, she was still able, in a way of resistance, of still being able to say, I'm still going to be a child. I'm still going to be around other people. I'm still going to love myself, um, even if there are bombs dropping around me. So that feeling that she got was able to reduce the stress that she had in that moment more than anything that I could say, more than even anything that she could say. Because not only is it that a picture is worth 1,000 words, maybe a video is worth 1,000,000 words, but connecting to your cultural memory, to something that has protected you in the past before, to something that's not even in English, that's maybe in her Arabic, in her mother tongue, I think that that's worth, I don't know, 10 trillion words. There's not even a way of being able to justify it, but let's just say
Mhm.
that that was able to solve an unsolvable problem. So, this is what I do with my clients on a regular basis. So, when I am helping them to heal and recover from gendered violence, I'm not giving them the instruction that you're going to become an advocate for other people who are going through these difficulties. But compassion just seems to be the gift that keeps on giving. When we are able to help a person to heal from their suffering, there's a different set of assumptions that they're going to operate with. And many times, because they believe that they've been able to heal through that disconfirmation, they become better suited to help other people to have other disconfirmations as well.
Excellent. So where we put our own feet matters, and
Yes.
healing can help with that. Having recently reread Racist Psychotherapy,
Hmm.
I'd like to talk about where a lot of non-anti-racist therapists may put their feet. And it is this kind of, you talk about it a lot in the book,
Hmm.
but I'd invite you to communicate pretty clearly what someone who has been oppressed by cultures might feel in a therapy office with someone with privilege who does the kind of almost omniscient, meaning I don't see race. They almost like try to
My
deal with
favorite.
the problem by disappearing the idea that I have feet too, and those feet are placed somewhere, right? Almost a kind of omniscient claim, right?
Yes.
That I'm
Yes.
above all of this.
Yes.
And I think that's probably almost certainly something that most therapists, especially therapists with privilege, whether they feel like they have privilege or not, um,
Sure.
it's a default way of operating, and
Well,
traditional psychotherapy allows it, you know?
well, that's why I was going to say is that it's default in that traditional psychotherapy encourages it.
Yes.
Is that let's say it in this way. For some reason, the person who says that I don't see race, they never say I don't see gender. They don't. even though both of these are socially constructed. And so it's interesting that race is supposed to be invisible. But the same people that have these conservative perspectives will definitely tell you, no, I see gender. There's only, anyways. I'm not going to get into the challenges and the social implications of Bud Light commercials, but I'm not going to get into why people get upset over ridiculous things. Um, Let me say it in this way: is when we talk about privilege, you're talking about a therapist who has privilege. We just need to be specific about what privilege is. Privilege is the absence of mindfulness. Privilege is I don't need to think about certain types of things. For example, as a male, there are times where if I'm going to go, well, I'm a father now and I'm really busy with stuff, but I'm just going to use this example. If I'm going to go to the nightclub or whatever, okay, I'm super cool. I don't need to go with my friends. I could just go by myself if I want to. But for some women, they need to make sure that where their friends are, who has their phone number, and all that, depending on the context, of course. Okay. The privilege is that I don't need to think about this. Let me use another example. If we're talking about a person who's rich, I can spend as much money as I want. I don't really need to care about paying the bills. The person who's in poverty, they need to be mindful of every coin that they're using, every penny that they're spending, et cetera, et cetera. So, privilege, as I've understood it, is really that you don't need to think, you don't need to actually be. And sometimes being a therapist puts us in a privileged position as well. But instead of us not thinking, it's that we can dissociate ourselves, we can separate ourselves from reality or from the present moment. When the person is saying, I don't see color, they're really trying to separate themselves from the experience that they're in. Because if they were to see color, it might be a little bit painful to recognize that their color has been used to harm other people, and they've been able to benefit in different types of ways. You're bringing me to the concept of the binary complex trauma cycle, which I'll explain as shortly as I can. Is that on one side, you will see there's this thing that's called white supremacy slash insecurity. I call it that because the white supremacists are never very secure in themselves. And I think we should maybe even move away from saying it's white supremacy, because the mass shooters that do these things usually have an experience that doesn't show that they feel good about themselves ever. These terrorists that do these things, they're never really in the best psychological space. For this idea of white insecurity, the way how it maintains itself is by a concept that's called soul murder. So intense violence that's directed towards another through emotional, sexual violence, etc. And that violence is projected into the Black body. That's what leads to the concept of Black suffering. This is when the Black person internalizes the idea that they are lazy, despite the fact that our ancestors were worked to death, that the Black male is hypersexualized, despite the fact that white enslavers sexually violated multiple young girls, etc. But we don't talk about the sexual part of slavery because it's too inconvenient. It adds race and gender, and we don't see we don't see race, and we kind of see gender. So it gets a little complicated. What happens though is what feeds into the idea of Black suffering is the fact that whiteness dissociates itself from any responsibility. So we will have these slave movies that need to come out all the time to reinforce the idea of Black inferiority and the fact that whiteness is not guilty of it. That it, to some degree, we're always focusing on the pain of Black people. So there's pain without an oppressor. So of course, people will be colorblind and they won't see racism as an actual issue. But this feeds into this dissociation that takes place. So the cycle is that Blackness is associated with suffering, and whiteness maintains itself by dissociating from anything that even resembles suffering or injustice. That the negative traits of whiteness are always projected into something other than itself, leading to this void that exists within whiteness. So you spoke about it as a default, but I do think that it's encouraged in our society to make it that white people do not necessarily think about whiteness. Otherwise, we might turn around and think, hold on a second, as a white person, am I really enjoying all of the benefits of the American dream? Is whiteness really a thing? Or is it really something that's been given to me to make it so that I protect the upper class of people that are really benefiting and keeping many of us in poverty? These are the ideas that, of course, MLK was talking about, Fred Hampton was talking about as well, Fred Hampton with the Rainbow Coalition. of bringing together white people. Because again, just knowing that while we are using these terms of white and black, these are just metaphors. But if we are able to understand that there's a common oppressor that is causing the racism, the sexism, the poverty that's crushing many Americans, doesn't matter what color you are, then we will realize that we all outnumber the racists. We will do away with the idea of thinking that it is just located in just the person based on their phenotype, and we'll understand that whiteness is just something that is meant to crush and harm people, but use white people as a shield to protect it. So I think that the people who are colorblind, who don't see race, I think, I understand. I understand their pain and their suffering, but I'd invite them to practice a bit more mindfulness.
And as someone who's tried, attended, you know, assorted diversity seminar, someone who has, I mean, clearly privilege. I can walk
Hmm.
into any bank in
Yes.
around here, walk into
Yes.
any bank and walk out of it, and nobody's going to know that I walked in 5 minutes
Mhm.
later.
Of
An
course.
enormous amount of privilege, and then trying to explore that privilege um, is complicated for those of us who are doing it. And I know Andrea is all about it. Andrea is
Yes.
trying to, many of the last trainer day was all about anti-racism, diversity.
Good.
Um, and it was great, but there was also a lot of people in the room who didn't know, I think, how to feel. And
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
a, I think a lot of people who identify as white try to do this work, and they don't know how to do it, right?
Yes.
And of course, ultimately, a lot of this, and I've heard you say elsewhere that part of what being about it is actually using your privilege
Yes.
in the concrete service, meaning giving up some of it almost in the concrete service of those that don't have it. It's
Hmm.
that's really making it actionable. But I also think it's deeply unfair, right? On its surface, for
Yes.
a white person to ask an anti-racist trainer how do I do this? How do you comfort me,
Mm-hmm.
for the
Hmm.
distress that I'm feeling? Because I think, kind of attuning, a little bit to, what my own experiences were. I had multiple voices,
Yes.
you know, and I guess the voice I've been trying to listen to is first just listen. Do you know me? First,
Yes.
just be present and listen to what's being communicated. You don't have to figure out exactly what right now to do. But I think there is a little bit of uncertainty about what to do and how to
It makes sense.
feel.
Let me add this is that it's very much like the dissociative client. The
Right,
dissociative client also feels confused about their symptoms because they're getting time distortion, they're getting amnesic barriers, they're getting somatic feelings that are hard to understand. And these things might be very similar to those attendees that you're talking about.
right,
It's just they couldn't put a finger on it. And oftentimes they will judge that because they feel bad, the speaker is bad.
right,
Because I'm feeling this thing, it's him, and that's what I'm explaining is that whiteness needs to dissociate from itself. It needs to make it that we are not in touch with these feelings or not being really close to them. The good news is that this is not an unsolvable problem.
mhm,
Again, many of my consultees that are white, therapists, clinicians, these are people who own practices. They call upon me to help them to be able to process these things. These are things that are not stored at the level of our cognitions, but it's in our nervous system. So anti-racist psychotherapy is not just designed to help to heal the wounds of racial trauma, but it's also designed to help to heal the racial trauma that white people have inherited from the system as well.
right. And that is something that I think, I mean, I've heard you talk about it. I've heard Resma Manicum talk about it,
Yes.
that a lot of white people aren't okay. Which I think is a generous perspective.
Yes, exactly. But again, I think that um, when we think about how and I write about this as well, is that when we think about a yoga instructor, despite the fact where we believe yoga comes from, the people who are yoga instructors don't always look that way. It's usually a white woman who eats kale that we're going to think of as a yoga instructor. But what's very interesting about that too is that we also disregard the influence of Kemetic yoga, of knowing that the Dravidian Indians who went to India, they came from somewhere and they brought that knowledge from somewhere. In very convenient ways, Africa is usually erased from our history. Even the reason why Portugal was trying to when we're talking about Christopher Columbus in that time, in that era, they don't talk about the importance that Portugal had of going to Mali to reach the richest man who ever existed, Mansa Musa. So we try to erase any reference to Africa in our society. And we try to just make it so that Black people are only associated with one thing. But what I wanted to say is that with white people, the reason why I think yoga is important for a lot of them is to connect with their bodies. Even though they've erased the cultural implications of it. The reason why mindfulness now is becoming, or has become, more interesting in psychotherapy is because white people need to connect to their
Yeah.
mind as well. And
So
so I'm hoping that when we are able to use four blinks, when we are able to use the RAP technique, that we are able to heal all people from the suffering that the society has caused, so that they can feel fully integrated, and not just their body, not just their mind, but all parts of the self.
so racism is partially a somatic dissociation.
It is largely that. It
Okay.
is largely that,
Cool.
except it's at the societal level, and that there's a system, and that everyone is in on it, but you're not allowed to talk about it because it's too painful, and you got to blame someone else for it. It's like as if there's a problem that we only see the victim for, and we don't see the oppressor for it, because don't see race.
Right.
It's easier this way,
Yeah.
but it is
Excellent.
solvable. We are able to reduce these experiences because it's survival based responses for racism. It's white people feeling like they'll be replaced, and that's what Resma Menachem is talking about with white body supremacy. Is just talking about how white people came to the country out of fear, came to the country out of wanting to save themselves, lived in the environment through genocide, through stealing people, through attacking people, and all these things. So a lot of the violence, all of that stuff that can't be said, is what those white trainers were feeling in that conference that you're talking about.
Thank you. Um, and I want to get back to the rap technique because
Yes.
this is a lot of what I wanna highlight. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you may be the first therapist to make a psychotherapy, largely built around Flash, right? So it's
Oh,
been this kind of, this little wand you can get out, but your approach, and again, I'm not asking you to go into it in detail, but can you take a overview of
it's
how you,
impossible, Tom. It's impossible. All of my answers are going to be 25 minutes long.
but I'm going to encourage you to sit with the difficulty of condensing it because there's elegance. There really
Yes.
is beauty and elegance
Thank you.
in what you're doing.
Thank
So,
you.
but there's a part of it. And let me back up a tiny bit. So I think the way we typically think of Flash is to think of it as this almost thing we rummage around in a drawer and get when we need. Does
Yes.
that make sense? And even for blinks, which I think can be an approach to psychotherapy, I haven't developed it into an approach of psychotherapy, but your rap conceptualization is a whole package. Does it make
Yes.
sense? It's conceptualized before intake. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like there's got intake components, there's
Yes.
assessment components, all the way through target selection. And so anyway, do you mind giving us an overview of RAP as an
Sure.
approach to psychotherapy?
Sure. So the RAP technique is part of the RAP strategies, rhythm and processing strategies. The goal is to eliminate the mental health consequences of racial trauma. That's why I developed it. And I noticed that Again, the structure of how we look at sessions needed to be based on disconfirmation. It needed to be based on the ability for the client to be able to change radically how they look at things and to be able to have choices in the way how they make decisions, which is very different from the way how trauma is installed in the first place. So, while there are times that I would use mindfulness techniques to teach the client to use the body to calm the mind and use the mind to calm the body, we also use mindfulness as a way of assessment, of being able to check to see, is the client within their window of tolerance, is the client able to follow these types of instructions, etc. So uh it gets a little specific, but just to say that that's a portion, it's like using the techniques for a different reason. By being able to teach the wrap technique, by being able to teach the client that they could bring in things that are culturally significant to them, and they can radically change how the next few days will go, or even radically change how they remember events from the past few years. We are instilling the idea of disconfirmation by being able to have a genogram that's going to say, this is what your family looked like. This is what you might have inherited in terms of legacies that are positive and negative, of looking at it always from a place of balance. This changes the way how they're looking at their experience in their families. And by making the racial trauma target history selection of asking questions that are based on what they experience in their life, this also creates a limited amount of targets that we're going to process. And by dealing with each of those targets one by one, we're able to let the client know that there is no such thing as a broken person, to let the client know that these are things that happen to you, but these are not things that define your full existence. And each time that the client is able to practice being able to feel awesome for no reason, they're changing the narrative based on the past, based on the present, and also based on the future. The wrap technique is meant to make it so that we train clients to be the best therapists they can be. The wrap technique is designed to make it so that the client knows that the healing comes from them. And ultimately, and I know that this is something that you would also encourage and endorse, is that we need to understand, because I've heard you say this, we need to
Mm,
understand why it is that we've outsourced therapists outside of the community, of making it that the therapy is something outside of who we are.
right.
And we want to integrate all aspects of the self, make it so all aspects of the self can get the resources they need so that they can make changes that exceed their expectations and the therapist's expectations, and one day even to change, if not the whole world, at least their internal world.
Excellent. Good. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about before I let people know where they can join a group in which
Sure.
we will be, um,
Fantastic. Yeah.
demonstrating aspects of the rap
Yeah.
technique?
The one thing I want to say is to anyone who's listening to this, regardless of your race, regardless of your gender, your identity, nationality, you are a person of value. You are a person of worth. You're beautiful because you are Black. You are Black because you are beautiful, regardless of where you come from. Even if you haven't found your purpose yet, I hope that you find it so that you can also, in your own revolutionary way, find ways of being able to find this compassion, make it the gift that keeps on giving, and make the changes that need to happen in therapy, outside of therapy, and throughout the world.
Excellent. Good. So we'll have a group. It's scheduled for February 26th. In the show notes, as this is distributed, details can be made available about that. So David, thank you. Another wonderful interaction that
Thank
ends
you.
with that beauty, that what is amazing about this work is also what has always been amazing
100%.
about you and inside you. So there's that real therapy process grounded hope. But I've heard you some said elsewhere, you also didn't come to comfort. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? There's this
All of
hope,
our emotions are beautiful.
right?
Every single one of our emotions has a function. And when we're able to see them without judgment, we are able to understand that they're all moving us towards healing and recovery.
Right. Excellent. Beautiful. Thank you so much. I
Thank
hope
you.
to I hope to have more
Thank you,
conversations
Tom.
with you
Many
going forward.
blessings.
And David, where can people get more information about you?
Sure.
Do you have a website or something
Yes.
that you may want to share?
Yes. So you can find more information about me at archertherapy.com. If you'd like to purchase some of my books, then you can go to amazon.com and you can find Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, Black Meditation, Racial Trauma Recovery, Black Mountain, and Transforming Complex Trauma. If you don't want to support billionaires who fly rocket ships around the world, you can also go to your local bookstore or library and you can request these books. The reason why I say that is because this revolution happens through collective. And so if you're able to request that book, other people will be aware of it. So I would like to just thank you again, Tom, for the work that you're doing in changing the world. And I see your dedication, and I see you're a person who actually is a therapist who's coming from the heart. And for what you are sharing in the world, we need more Tom Zimmermans to be on this planet. So
Well,
uh,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you. And again, I appreciate every good thing you're doing in the world as well.
thank you.
Let's talk soon. And thanks everyone for joining and stay in touch.
Many blessings. Take care, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.